Into the frozen killing ground. January 14th, 1945. Near a nameless crossroads outside Bastogne, Belgium. The world is white and red. White from the snow that crusts everything. The shattered fence posts, the broken stone walls, the splintered trunks of the trees. Red from the fresh blood that spatters across it in arcs and droplets, already starting to freeze in the cutting wind. Private First Class Jack Miller can taste the iron in the air even through the wool of his scarf. He's 20 years old, wrapped in an olive drab overcoat that's stiff with frost fingers, locked around the wooden stock of his M1 Garand. The rifle is hot from firing. Smoke leaks from the open action as he slams in a new 8-round en-bloc clip, the metallic ping swallowed by the deeper roar of the battlefield. Somewhere ahead, a German MG-42 is chattering from the tree line, its rounds stitching the snow like a zipper of dirt and slush. Every burst punches the ground closer to the low stone wall, where Jack and the rest of 3rd Squad 2nd Platoon are pressed flat. You can hear the sound, a brutal mechanical snarl, far faster than any American gun. It turns the open ground into something else entirely, no longer just a field, but a killing zone. Keep your damn heads down. Staff Sergeant Frank Kowalski shouts his voice, a torn rasp against the wind. He's hunched behind the same wall helmet, dusted with snow, bar gunner's sling cutting across his chest. A cigarette smolders between his lips, ash, trembling with every concussion. Jack's helmet is too big. It wobbles slightly when he looks up. Snowflakes collect along the rim. He's been cold for so long he barely remembers what it felt like not to be. His boots are soaked despite the overshoes, and he can't feel his toes. He can, however, feel fear. Not the wild screaming terror of first contact he's already had that months ago in the hedgerows of France. This is a quieter thing now, a heavy stone in his gut. It sits there while he works the rifle, while he breathes, while he watches the gaps between the stones in the wall for any sign of movement. Across the field beyond the blown-out carcass of a farmhouse, shapes move in the tree line, gray figures almost blending with the trees. German infantry in field gray coats and coal scuttle helmets, some with white snow smocks that make them ghost-like. They dart from trunk to trunk, muzzle flashes winking like fireflies. On the left, someone yells Corporal Eddie Ruiz, maybe his voice half choked by the wind. Jack tilts his head just enough to see. A German squad is pushing out from the tree line low and fast, one man dragging a belt of ammunition for the machine gunner, another pausing to fire short bursts from an MP-40. Bullets whip overhead, snapping the bare branches above like brittle fingers. "Garen, do your job." Jack breathes more to himself than to the rifle. He shoulders the weapon cheek pressed against the cold metal of the receiver front sight post, hovering over a gray blur. He sucks in a breath, lets half of it out, and squeezes the trigger. The rifle bucks. A single shot, then another, then another. The recoil slams into the bone of his shoulder, familiar and grounding. One of the gray figures crumples mid-stride, legs folding as if someone cut them with scissors. Another stumbles, clutching at his stomach, snow blooming red beneath his hands. Jack doesn't have time to watch them fall. He cycles targets, firing again, adjusting for the wind. The MG-42 roars in answer, and the wall spits dust and stone chips into his face. He flinches, heart hammering. "Nice shooting." Miller Kowalski barks, already swinging the bar up over the wall. Ruiz smoke out. "We're not dying behind this damn garden fence." Eddie Ruiz, a compact kid from New York, with a white breath cloud and a perpetual grin even here, fumbles a smoke grenade from his belt. He yanks the pin with his teeth, hurls it high. It arcs through the air, a dark speck against the pale sky, then disappears. Moments later, a thick gray cloud begins to billow, dragged sideways by the wind. "On my mark," Kowalski roars. "We move to that house, Miller, you're with me?" "Jenkins cover, right dock, stay low." Jack swallows. The house is more suggestion than reality, now roof caved in one wall, blown completely away, interior exposed to the elements. But it's closer to the tree line, closer to the Germans. And in this math, closer is life. Kowalski claps a gloved hand against Jack's shoulder. "You good kid?" Jack nods automatically. His breath fogs the air. There's no time to answer truthfully. 3, 2, 1 move. They explode from behind the wall as one boots punching through the snow-crust bodies, hunched heads tucked. The smoked field becomes a world of ghosts and shadows. The MG-42's stutter becomes muffled, but not gone. Bullets still whip through the air, tearing little whirls in the smoke. Jack runs. He feels the weight of his gear with every step, the canteen slapping against his thigh, the entrenching tool jabbing his hip, the 2 spare bandoliers of 30-06 bouncing against his chest, the M1911 in its holster, heavy on his belt. His breath burns in his throat, each inhale a dagger. To your left, a man stumbles, Private Jenkins' foot catching in a shell hole hidden by snow. He pitches forward with a shout helmet tumbling. Jack hears Kowalski curse, but they can't stop. They can't. A mortar shell drops somewhere behind them with a shriek and a concussion that lifts the snow in a wave. The blast swats at Jack's legs, shoving him sideways. His ears ring sound, turning to a high, painful whine. He throws himself the last few yards, slamming shoulder first into the half-standing wall of the ruined farmhouse, sliding down into cover. Fresh chips of stone rain down around him. He coughs, dragging air into his lungs. His heart feels like it's trying to escape his chest. Kowalski crashes in beside him, Barrett, the radio man, on the other side, clutching his SCR-300 like a lifeline. Somewhere farther back, Doc Heller is shouting something about bandages and plasma, his aid bag already open. Jack risks a glance over the wall. The smoke is thinning. Through it, he can see a shape writhing in the snow between the lines, halfway between the ruined farmhouse and the tree line. At first, he thinks it's one of theirs. The figure is on his back boots, kicking weakly, one arm thrown out. Snow around him is churned dark. Then the wind shifts, peeling the smoke aside for a heartbeat, and Jack sees the field gray coat, the coal scuttle helmet, the blackened insignia on the collar. A German who is very much alive. He's shouting something, voice thin and high, carried raggedly over the distance. It's not English, but some things don't need translation, the way his hands clutch at his chest, the frantic animal movement of his head, the way his legs jerk. Kowalski follows Jack's gaze. His jaw tightens. "Leave him," he mutters. "He'll bleed out. We got our own to worry about." As if to prove the point, a groan comes from behind them. Jenkins is being dragged into cover by Ruiz, one pant leg soaked with blood where shrapnel caught him. Doc Heller is already there, gloves on hands red. Jack looks back at the German. The man's movements are slowing. His hands rise, fall, smearing red across the snow. One arm reaches weakly in their direction, fingers splayed. You can feel Jack's heart thumping. He swallows Adam's apple bobbing. He has seen dead Germans. He has made some of them dead. That he tells himself is war. But this man is not dead yet. The MG-42 has gone quiet, maybe moving positions, maybe reloading. The field is eerily still between the fading streaks of smoke. No one is firing at the wounded man. No one from either side is moving toward him. Jack hears his own voice before he realizes he's speaking. "Sergeant," he says, throat dry, he's hit bad. Kowalski doesn't look at him. He's a Kraut Miller. Let it go. Silence stretches for a moment, broken only by the distant thump of artillery and Jenkins' ragged breathing. Jack's fingers tighten around the stock of his rifle. He can feel the worn grooves where his gloves don't quite cover the oiled wood, slick with melting snow. He looks again at the German, at the hand still trying weakly to reach toward the sky. Something shifts inside him. Not suddenly, not like the snap of a twig, more like ice under a river starting to crack. He licks his lips. "What if he doesn't?" Jack hears himself say softly. "What if he doesn't bleed out?" Kowalski finally turns to stare at him, eyes narrowed under the rim of his helmet. "What are you getting at, Miller?" Jack looks back at the field, at the lonely gray figure lying between the lines like a discarded piece of gear. He doesn't have an answer yet. Only a feeling that whatever he does next, it won't be something he can easily explain later. The walk into no man's land. Jack's breath hangs in the air as a thin mist while he stares at the German. The man's arm has fallen back to the snow now. His chest rises and falls in shallow, stuttering motions. Every exhale paints a faint cloud against the gray sky. Somewhere under that field gray tunic, blood is pumping out into the frozen earth. Miller Kowalski growls, "Forget about him. We got Jenkins hit, we got Krauts in the trees, and command breathing down our necks. You want to be a hero, pick an American." Jack doesn't answer. He hears artillery rumbling in the distance, a rolling growl beyond the tree line. Small arms fire flickers here and there, but the immediate front has gone strangely quiet. It's that eerie pause in a firefight when both sides are adjusting, reloading, rethinking. The kind of silence that might last seconds or end with everyone dying at once. Jenkins lets out a harsh hiss as Doc Heller tightens a tourniquet. "Christ, Doc. You want the leg or not?" Doc snaps. His gloved fingers, slicked with blood, tighten the strap above Jenkins's knee. "You're lucky that shrapnel didn't chew up your artery." Jack glances back at them, then out at the field again. The German is maybe 30 yards away. Maybe a little more. Far enough to feel exposed. Close enough that if you sprinted... "What are you doing, Jack?" he thinks. He's the enemy. But the thought doesn't settle. It just spins in his head like a loose shell casing. He remembers something from before the war, before the uniform. A church in Ohio with creaking pews, his father's heavy hand on his shoulder, the pastor talking about the Good Samaritan. A stranger on the road. A man in a ditch left to die. "Love your enemies," the pastor had said. "Do good to those who hate you." It had sounded impossible then. It sounds insane now, Sergeant Jack says quietly. "We're supposed to be better than them, aren't we?" Kowalski's eyes narrow. "You think that guy out there wouldn't put a bullet in your head if he could lift his rifle?" "I know he would," Jack replies, "but he can't." The wind gusts tugging at their coats, swirling a dust of snow into the ruined farmhouse. Somewhere behind the German lines, a whistle blows sharp and shrill. Jack flinches, waiting for the machine gun to open up again. It doesn't, not yet. Kowalski shakes his head. "You step out there, you're dead. They'll cut you in half just to make a point. Or our own guys will thinking you're one of them. Stay in cover." That's an order. Jack nods, but his eyes don't leave the wounded man. The German tries one more time to lift his hand. It barely rises a few inches off the snow before dropping again. Jack's heart is pounding so hard he can feel it in his throat. If he does nothing, this man dies. It's simple. It's logical. It's war. If he moves, he might die instead. Another memory, his mother in the kitchen apron, dusted with flour radio, humming some scratchy big band tune, her hands cradling his face the night before he shipped out, eyes wet. "Promise me you'll come home, Jack," she'd whispered. "Promise you'll keep your soul intact." "I'm sorry, Sarge," Jack hears himself say. His voice sounds far away. "I can't just watch." Kowalski's jaw clamps down tight. "Miller." But Jack is already moving. He slings his rifle across his back, in one practiced motion, the leather strap biting into his shoulder, and vaults the low interior wall before he can think better of it. Snow rushes up to meet his boots. The sudden exposure feels like stepping naked into a spotlight. The field opens around him wide and white and terribly empty. You can feel the way every nerve in his body goes electric. He expects the crack of a rifle, the hammering growl of the MG-42, the slap of bullets. His shoulders hunch instinctively, head-low, arms pumping. Nothing yet. Only the rattle of his gear and the ragged sound of his own breathing in his ears. Behind him, Ruiz shouts something in Spanish that sounds suspiciously like a prayer. Kowalski swears so loudly it might reach Berlin. Jack runs. Each step breaks the snow crust, sending brittle shards flying. His boots slip on hidden ice. He nearly goes down, windmilling his arms, but somehow keeps upright. The air bites his cheeks, lashes his eyes with blown snow. His heart feels like a drum, trying to beat its way out of his ribs. He focuses on the German, on that gray shape against the white. Closer now, the details sharpen. The man's face is pale beneath a sheen of sweat lips, turning bluish at the edges. His field gray greatcoat is torn open at the chest where the bullet, Jack's bullet, someone's bullet, punched through. Blood has soaked the wool, congealing in the cold. Steam rises faintly where heat still bleeds out. The German's eyes flutter as Jack skids to a stop beside him, dropping to his knees. They are startlingly light, a washed-out blue, clouded with shock. For a beat, the two men just stare at each other. The German's hand twitches, reaching weakly for the pistol at his belt. His fingers brush the grip, fall away. He tries to speak, but only a hoarse sound comes out, half choked by blood. "I've got you," Jack says, breathless. "I've got you okay." The German doesn't understand the words, but something in Jack's tone cuts through. His eyes focus for a moment, confusion warring with fear. Jack glances back at his own lines. The ruined farmhouse looks smaller from here. He can see Kowalski half exposed behind the wall, gesturing wildly. Barrett crouched over the radio, Ruiz watching with wide eyes. Doc is still bent over Jenkins, but his head lifts, expression unreadable. No one is shooting yet. Jack doesn't know how long that will last. He shoves his hands under the German's back fingers, digging into the frozen ground beneath. The man cries out a strangled animal noise as Jack lifts. Blood half-frozen cracks and flakes from the wool. Jack feels the sticky warmth seep into his gloves, up his sleeves. "Sorry," Jack mutters. "Sorry. I'm sorry." The German grabs at his sleeve with surprising strength, fingers clawing at the fabric. His mouth works, forming a single word. "Mutti." Jack swallows hard. He shifts, rolling the man carefully onto his side, then his stomach, trying to keep pressure off the wound. Standard field training for moving a casualty plays through his mind, drilled into him in some stateside camp under a hot American sun. Don't drag the chest. Keep the airway clear. Watch the legs. Except this casualty wears the wrong color. Jack hooks his arms under the German's, locking his hands across the man's chest. The weight is shocking, dead weight, except he isn't dead. Not yet. Jack digs his heels into the snow and starts to pull. Every step backward feels like a mile. The German groans as his legs trail in the snow boots, carving two ragged furrows. Jack's muscles scream. His lower back lights with pain. The leather of his gloves slips against blood-slick wool, and he tightens his grip, knuckles white under the fabric. Halfway back, the first shot cracks. It snaps past Jack's ear with a flat, vicious wick, close enough that he feels the air move. Instinct slams him closer to the ground. The German cries out again, eyes rolling. "Hold your fire," someone bellows from the farmhouse, Kowalski voice hoarse and furious. "That's Miller. God damn it, hold your fire." For a few heartbeats, Jack doesn't know whose bullet it was. His own side panicked and trigger happy. Or a German, somewhere in that dark tree line, lining up another shot. He doesn't wait to find out. He drags harder, slipping and scrambling boots, searching for traction. His lungs burn. His muscles feel like they might tear clean off the bone. Each backward step is a small victory. Behind his goggles and helmet, somewhere in the snow-heavy woods, a German soldier watches. Jack can't see him, but he can feel him, some presence, some set of eyes. The unseen man keeps his finger tight on the trigger, breath steady. And for reasons Jack will never know, that man doesn't fire again. The ruined farmhouse looms closer. Ruiz suddenly breaks from cover, sprinting out into the field despite Kowalski's shouted curse. He meets Jack halfway, boots, kicking up plumes of snow, expression a mix of terror and determination. Loco Ruiz pants as he grabs the German's legs, taking some of the weight. "You are completely Loco Miller, you know that." "Shut up and pull," Jack gasps. Together they drag the wounded enemy across the last stretch of open ground, boots, churning, shoulders hunched. Another mortar round lands far enough away to be only a dull thud. The air is full of ghosts, smoke, and breath and fear. They tumble into cover behind the farmhouse wall, hauling the German with them. Doc Heller blinks, momentarily stunned, as the gray-clad body collapses at his knees. "What the hell is this?" Doc demands, eyes darting between Jack and the wounded man. Jack is bent, double hands on his knees, chest heaving. His breath saws in and out loud in his own ears. He looks up, eyes meeting Doc's, then Kowalski's. "A casualty," Jack manages. "He needs a medic." Kowalski stares at him for a long, taut moment, eyes hard as flint. The battle still rumbles around them. Jenkins groans. Somewhere a radio squawks for artillery coordinates. Finally, Kowalski exhales through his teeth a sharp, frustrated hiss. "You just adopted yourself a Kraut Miller," he mutters. "And I'm pretty sure Command's not going to like that one damn bit." But he doesn't order Jack to throw the man back into the snow. Doc hesitates, then opens his bag. Smuggling mercy. Doc Heller's hesitation lasts only a heartbeat. Then training takes over. He snaps open his scissors, cutting away the German's blood-crusted tunic with quick, efficient strokes. Cloth parts revealing a pale chest, mottled with bruises, a small, dark hole, just left of center entry wound. The exit wound, when he rolls the man slightly, is uglier. Torn flesh, ragged edges, blood, frozen in crusts around the wool. Through and through, Doc mutters, "Missed the spine, missed the heart. Lucky bastard." He doesn't say for a Kraut. He doesn't have to. It hangs there anyway. Jack kneels opposite him, still panting, hands shaking inside his gloves. He can feel his pulse throbbing in his fingertips, in his temples, in the hollow at the base of his throat. Snow has melted in patches on his coat, where the German's blood soaked through, leaving irregular dark stains. "Hold this," Doc orders, pressing Jack's hand over a folded dressing, pushing it against the wound. It is hot and slick and wrong. Jack swallows and holds anyway. The German's eyes flutter. His breath is a wet, rattling thing. He coughs once, a thin spray of red flecking his lips. Doc jams a morphine syringe into the man's thigh thumb, squeezing the tube until it crumples. "Don't move," Doc tells him, as if he understands. "You move, you die faster. That's the deal." The German stares at him, then at Jack, uncomprehending but aware. His fingers twitch, finding Jack's sleeve again, clinging. Behind them, the war keeps grinding. Artillery thumps in the distance. A fresh burst of machine gun fire crackles along the tree line, answered by the harsher bark of American 30 cals. Barrett is hunched over the SCR 300 helmet, tilted low, shouting coordinates into the handset. Ruiz reloads his M1 lips, moving silently, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in profanity. Kowalski watches it all with the pinched expression of a man weighing bad choices. He finally crouches beside Jack, voice low. "You realize what you've done right." Jack doesn't look up. His hands are steady now, pressing the dressing exactly where Doc told him to. He was bleeding out. That's not the point. Kowalski's jaw works. "We're not exactly running a charity. Command hears you risked your ass to haul in a Kraut. They'll have my hide and yours. There's a reason they tell us not to go sightseeing in no man's land." He doesn't say the other part, the rumor that's trickled down the line that unofficially higher-ups don't want medics wasting plasma on enemy troops, while Americans die. Jack keeps his gaze on the German's face. The man's eyes have gone unfocused again, pupils blown wide. "We're supposed to be better than them," he says quietly. "Or that's what they told us when they shipped us over." Kowalski snorts softly. They tell mothers a lot of things. A shell lands somewhere closer, the blast rattling loose debris from the farmhouse rafters. Snow sifts down through broken beams. The smell of cordite and churned earth seeps in with the cold. Doc glances up, frowning. "This one's bad. Needs surgery, not field dressings. If we don't get him to the aid station soon, he's going to drown in his own blood." Kowalski shoots him a look. "You volunteering my men to chauffeur Nazis now, Doc?" Doc shrugs one shoulder. "I'm just telling you what the reality is. You want him to live, he doesn't do it here." Jack hears that and feels something settle heavy and inevitable in his chest. Aid station. That means jeeps, litters, medics, and officers, questions, forms, prisoner of war protocols, MPs, and somewhere in that chain, someone who'll decide this isn't worth the trouble. He can see it in his mind's eye, a quick shake of the head, a muttered apology about limited supplies the German carried back out and left behind a pile of spent bandages. His hands tighten on the dressing. "I'll go," Jack says. Kowalski swings toward him. "Like hell you will. We're still holding this position. I need rifles here. We start sending guys back every time they feel like playing Florence Nightingale." "I'm not leaving because I feel like it." Jack cuts in, surprising himself. "I shot him. Or somebody like me did. He's on our side of the line now." He's our responsibility." Kowalski's eyes flash. For a moment, Jack thinks the sergeant's going to hit him. Instead, Kowalski exhales a white puff of breath and looks away. "Resupply jeep is due in 15, Barrett calls out, reading off his notes. "They're bringing ammo and hauling Jenkins to the battalion aid station. That's all we're cleared for." Jack looks at Jenkins, pale, sweating, panting through clenched teeth as Doc's field dressing soaks through. American, friend, squad mate. "There's room for 2 on a litter jeep," Jack says quietly. "You've seen it." And when they ask why the second casualty's wearing a field gray coat, Kowalski demands, "You planning to tell them he's your long-lost cousin from Munich?" Jack swallows. He hadn't thought that far. Not really. He just knew he couldn't leave the man to die in the snow. Doc clears his throat. "You could strip him." Both men look at him. Doc lifts his hands. Not completely. Just the coat, the helmet. Wrap him in a blanket. To a harried medic at the aid station, a bleeding body's a bleeding body. We tag him as unknown. Let the docs figure it out when they cut the blanket away. "That's fraud," Kowalski says flatly. "That's survival," Doc replies. "Whose exactly is above my pay grade?" Jack looks down at the German. Without the greatcoat and helmet, he'd be just a man. Pale skin, dark hair slicked with sweat, chest rising in little jerks. No uniform, no insignia, no eagle, no iron cross. Just a body that hurts. He hears his mother's voice again. "Keep your soul intact." His decision stops being a decision and becomes a reality he's already stepped into. "I'll take him," Jack says. "Put him with Jenkins. I'll tell them he's another casualty from the shelling. They don't need to know more than that. And if they figure it out," Kowalski presses, "you want an article, 15. You want to explain to some colonel why you lied about a Nazi on your litter. I'll deal with it." Jack says, surprising himself with how steady he sounds. "But if we don't at least try, then we're no different than the stories they tell us about them. About leaving our guys to freeze." Kowalski stares at him for a long moment. Snow falls through the broken roof in a slow, steady sift, landing on steel helmets, on bandoliers, on the German's bare chest. Finally, Kowalski's shoulders slump a fraction. "Fine," he mutters. "Fine. God help me, but fine. Doc, strip him. Ruiz, you got an extra blanket?" Ruiz grumbles, but he's already rummaging through his pack. Within minutes, the German's coat and helmet lie in a heap beside the wall, hastily kicked under a broken beam. His torso is wrapped in a wool blanket that's quickly turning dark at the center. Without the trappings of uniform, he looks younger, vulnerable, human. Jack and Ruiz lift him onto the spare litter, a rough wooden frame with canvas slung between. Jenkins lies on the other, teeth gritted, trying not to groan. "You're a damn idiot," Jenkins mutters at Jack as they adjust straps. "You know that, right?" "Probably," Jack says. They hear the jeep before they see it. The distant whine of an engine, the crunch of tires on frozen ruts, growing louder. Moments later, it nosedives behind the farmhouse, a battered olive-drab vehicle with a red cross painted on the hood sides, splattered with mud and ice. The driver, a corporal, with a cigarette dangling from his lip, leaps out, ducking instinctively under imaginary fire. "Got orders to haul one critical back to the aid station and drop off 3036 and K-Rats," he barks. "Which one's the stiff?" Kowalski jerks his thumb at Jenkins. "Him. Leg full of metal. And this one," he nods vaguely toward the blanket-wrapped shape, caught it in the chest. "Blast took his gear. Tag says Miller, but we can't read the rest. Get 'em both out of here before the Krauts get interested again." Jack hears the lie. So does Doc. The medic who rode in on the jeep, another private Red Cross armband dark with old stains, gives a quick once-over. He sees blood, sees pale faces, sees bandages. He doesn't see a Feldgrau coat or a coal scuttle helmet. "Fine by me," the medic says, already helping load Jenkins onto the back. "Long as they're breathing, they're my problem." Jack climbs onto the jeep's rear step, one hand on the litter frame, the other gripping the side rail. Kowalski catches his eye. "You ride with them, Miller. You started this mess, you see it through, but listen to me." His voice drops. "Once he's off that jeep and behind a tent flap, he's not your business anymore. You understand?" Jack nods. He doesn't say that he knows he'll never really be free of it. The jeep lurches forward, engine revving, wheels slipping before finding purchase. As the ruined farmhouse and Kowalski's dark silhouette shrink behind him, Jack looks down at the blanket-wrapped chest, rising and falling beside Jenkins. The German's eyes crack open just for a moment. They meet Jack's. No words, no shared language, just a look that is somehow heavier than the wound. Then the Jeep turns and the battlefield disappears behind a stand of skeletal trees as they rattle toward the distant cluster of tents and Red Cross flags. Behind the Red Cross flag, the Jeep bounces and lurches along the frozen track, each rut sending a fresh spike of pain through Jenkins' leg. He grits his teeth, knuckles white on the litter's edge. "Hang in there, amigo." Ruiz mutters, one hand braced on Jenkins' shoulder to steady him. "We're almost to the meatball surgery." The driver barks a short laugh. "You wish. This is just the first stop on the tour of hell." Jack barely hears them. His eyes keep drifting to the German. The blanket over the man's chest rises and falls in shallow waves. Every so often his face twitches, pain breaking through the morphine haze. The edges of the dressing beneath the blanket are already darkening again, the red creeping outward. The air smells like exhaust blood and cold metal. Wind claws at Jack's face, tearing tears from the corners of his eyes that have nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the speed and the sting of the cold. As they crest a small rise, the battalion aid station comes into view. You can see it with him, a cluster of olive-drab tents huddled in a shallow depression, canvas walls stained with mud and old blood. Red Cross flags flap from poles, their white fields smudged with ash, the red crosses stark and almost obscenely bright against the gray noon. Jeeps and ambulances come and go in a churn of exhaust and shouted orders. Men move everywhere, walking wounded, limping with arms in slings. Stretcher bearers hunched over their burdens. Medics in stained armbands weaving between them with crates of plasma morphine bandages. The air is a swirl of noise, groans, curses, the buzz of generators, the bark of someone calling for a surgeon now. The Jeep fishtails slightly as it pulls into a line of other vehicles. The driver kills the engine, and suddenly the world feels oddly quiet in the brief space between revving motors. "Let's go," the medic snaps, already dropping off the side. "Get him inside." Jack jumps down, boots hitting half-frozen mud. He grabs the head end of the German's litter. Another medic, different armband, same dead tired eyes, takes the foot. Jenkins goes first, carried toward a tent marked surgical in black stenciled letters. He disappears through the flap, Ruiz trailing, voice low and urgent. Jack's turn. He and the medic lug the German toward another tent, this one tagged triage. The flap is tied open to the wind, revealing a cramped interior lit by bare bulbs. Cots line both sides, some occupied by men bandaged head to toe, some waiting. A lieutenant in a helmet with a red cross painted on it stands at a folding table, clipboard in hand, eyes moving like searchlights. Jack can feel his heart climbing into his throat. The German moans a soft guttural sound as they cross the threshold. The lieutenant looks up. "What have we got?" he asks, already stepping around the table. "Chest wound from shelling," the Jeep medic says, not missing a beat. "Gear blown, clean off, tags unreadable. Lost blood, but veins are holding." Doc in the line says, "Get him under a lamp or he's done." Jack feels the lie hover there in the air. The lieutenant moves in, pulling the blanket aside without ceremony. For a moment, the German's pale chest, smeared with iodine and blood, is exposed. The lieutenant's eyes track the wound, the dressing, the way the man's ribs move when he breathes. "Entry here," he mutters, fingers probing gently. "Exit. There. Through and through. Lucky. Get him plasma and an OR slot if one opens. Name?" The medic glances at Jack just slightly. Jack's mind goes blank. The dog tags. The German's tags. They're still under the blanket, somewhere under the bandage, under the improvised wrap. Jack sees in a flash of panic some future clerk lifting the blanket, fingers closing on notched metal with stamped German words. "Does it matter?" he hears himself say. "He's bleeding the same as the rest of us." The lieutenant's eyes flick to him sharp. For a moment, Jack thinks he's gone too far. Then behind them, a new commotion erupts. Two stretchers coming in at once, one man screaming about his arm, another ominously silent face, gray abdomen, swaddled in bloody dressings. A medic shouts, "Gut shot. We need a surgeon now." And the lieutenant's attention whips away. He scrawls something on his clipboard UNK in the name box, a hasty notation in the margin, then jerks his head toward the rear of the tent. "Third cot on the left. If he's still breathing in an hour, we'll see what the surgeons can do." Next, just like that, Jack and the medic haul the German to the indicated cot. They slide him off the litter as gently as they can in the rush. The German's hand snatches weakly at Jack's sleeve, then falls back. For a moment, everything narrows. The noises of the tent fade. The rows of cots dissolve. It's just Jack and the man on the bed. The German's eyes crack open, pupils huge irises that washed out blue again. His lips move. Jack leans in, not sure why. "Warum," the German whispers. The word scrapes out rough and thin. Jack doesn't know much German. Enough to understand 3 words: why, where, mother. This one is one of those he swallows, because he says quietly somebody had to. The German stares at him for one long heartbeat. Then his eyes roll back, lids slipping shut as the morphine drags him under. "Hey, soldier." The medic claps Jack's shoulder. "You look like you've seen a ghost. You done here? We got more bodies coming in." Jack straightens. The moment is over. The tent swirls back into focus, the reek of antiseptic and blood, the clink of instruments in enamel trays, the murmur of voices, the distant bark of an officer demanding someone move faster. "Yeah," Jack says, "I'm done." He isn't. Not really. But he forces himself to turn away. As he steps back through the tent flap into the cold, the light feels different. Harsher, somehow. The sky is still the same flat gray, but the Red Cross flag snaps overhead, like an accusation and a benediction all at once. On the walk back toward the Jeep, he passes a small stack of wooden crates. The stencils on the side read "Plasma," human in block letters. For a second, he imagines one of those bottles hanging over the German's cot, clear tubing running into his arm life, dripping back in one slow, measured drop at a time. Private Miller. The bark snaps him out of it. A captain in a clean overcoat is striding toward him from the surgical tent, brow furrowed, clipboard in hand, helmet angled just so. His rank glints in the gray light. Jack's stomach flips. "Sir," he says, coming to something approximating attention. The captain's eyes skim the clipboard. "Miller, Jack. 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon. You came in with 2 litter cases." His gaze lifts sharp. "Corporal Jenkins and 1 unidentified." "That right." "Yes, sir." "Doc's note says you personally dragged the 2nd casualty in from forward of your line." Jack feels the world tighten. "Yes, sir," he says carefully. The captain studies him for a second, lips pressed into a thin line. The wind tugs at the edges of his overcoat. Somewhere behind him, an ambulance door slams. "You understand we don't have infinite supplies, Private," the captain says. "You understand some men don't make it off that line because we don't have room for everyone." Jack's throat feels dry. "Yes, sir." The captain searches his face as if looking for something: defiance, regret, stupidity. Maybe all 3. Finally, he sighs. "Next time you decide to play hero, make damn sure you don't get yourself killed in the process. We need living rifles more than we need martyrs." He scribbles something on the clipboard, flicks his hand in dismissal. "Get back to your unit, Miller. Your sergeant's probably tearing his hair out." "Yes, sir." Jack turns away, boots crunching on the frozen ground. He doesn't look back at the tent. He doesn't see the moment half an hour later when 2 orderlies wheel the German's cot through another flap toward brighter lights and a waiting scalpel. He doesn't see the surgeon glance at the wound and murmur, "We might be able to save this one." He never sees that man again. On the Jeep ride back, the battlefield creeps toward him over the horizon, a smear of smoke and flame and distant thunder. Ruiz dozes with his chin on his chest. The driver hums some half-remembered tune from before the war. Jack sits very still, hands in his lap, staring at the blood on his gloves. He doesn't say a word. The weight of an unasked question. When the Jeep rolls back into the shattered farmhouse position, the light has shifted. Afternoon has sunk into that flat, colorless gray, that comes before evening in winter when shadows don't lengthen so much as simply deepen. Smoke hangs low over the tree line. The thunder of artillery has moved farther off, or maybe Jack's ears have just grown numb to it. He jumps down boots, biting into the churned snow. His gloves are still stain-dried blood cracking in the creases. For a moment, he just stands there, the battlefield strangely muted, like someone has wrapped the world in cotton. "About damn time," Kowalski says, emerging from behind the wall. His bar hangs muzzle down on its sling. His helmet is new, another one dented by shrapnel lies discarded nearby. "You get Jenkins squared away?" "Yes, Sergeant." Jack clears his throat. He was still talking when they took him in. "Doc thinks he'll keep the leg." "Maybe." Kowalski grunts. "Good. Means he still owes me $50. And the other one?" Jack feels the question catch somewhere in his chest. He sees the German on the cot again, lips forming that one hoarse word. "Warum?" "On a table last I saw," Jack says softly. "They were going to try." Kowalski studies him for a beat, searching his face as if for cracks. "You did your part," he says finally. "Whether that Kraut makes it or not, that's on the docks now. Not on you. Clear." "Yes, Sergeant." The words feel like someone else's. The day grinds on. They hold the crossroads. They shoot and get shot at. They huddle against the cold and choke down K-rations that taste like cardboard and homesickness. That night, Jack lies in a shallow dugout, staring up at a sky he can't see for the snow and smoke, and listens to men snore and mutter in their sleep. Somewhere not far away, a wounded man, maybe American, maybe German, cries out once long and thin before tapering into silence. Jack closes his eyes. He does not pray. He doesn't know what to ask for anymore. The war doesn't end all at once. It frays. One day they're still taking fire in some nameless patch of woods. The next, the German guns seem fewer. The counterattacks less desperate, more scattered. Rumors seep down the line like water through bad plumbing. Hitler's dead. Berlin's fallen. Somebody heard it from a guy who heard it from a tank crew that talked to an air officer. Eventually, the rumors become orders. No more charges. No more daily casualty lists posted on the company bulletin board. One morning, instead of advancing, they're cleaning weapons with a weird kind of uncertainty, waiting for someone to tell them what they are now, if not soldiers in a war. Jack stands in a muddy field in May helmet under his arm, listening to an officer read a proclamation about victory in Europe. Men cheer. Some cry. Some just stand silent, expressions hollow. Ruiz claps him on the back. "We did it, Miller," he crows, grin wide eyes bright with something like disbelief. "We're going home, hermano. Back to real food and real beds and women who don't carry rifles." Jack smiles, because that's what you're supposed to do. Inside, something is quiet, not peaceful, just muted like a radio turned down low but not clicked off. In the weeks that follow, there are truck rides and tent cities and endless lines for demobilization papers, lines for medical checks, lines just to stand in another line. Jack turns in his M1 hands over gear that's been part of his body for months. The armor he wore through fire becomes an item on a quartermaster's ledger. He considers asking once at a field hospital. They pass through en route to a rear staging area. There's a bulletin board near the entrance pinned with notices lists of wounded reassignments, a paper about mail delays. Jack lingers, scanning the names' eyes, skipping over familiar hometowns and unfamiliar ones. He doesn't know what he's looking for. He doesn't know the German's name. "Looking for someone?" a nurse asks, pausing beside him. Her face is tired, but kind cap askew. Jack opens his mouth. An image flashes in his mind, her walking between rows of cots, her tray of charts. Her expression if he says he's looking for a German soldier she might have saved instead of some boy from Iowa. "No," he says instead, "just checking." She nods, moves on. The moment passes. He never asks again. Ohio, 1953. The war is something on newsreel footage, now grainy black and white images flickering on theater screens, announcers with smooth voices, narrating over scenes of Normandy, the Bulge, Berlin. Our boys in helmets that look too big, waving at cameras, chewing gum, throwing cigarettes at kids who chase their trucks. Jack watches those newsreels sometimes from the back row, hat in his hands. The smell of popcorn and perfume feels foreign after cordite and mud. When the lights come up, people murmur. Imagine being there as if it's something that happened in a book. He works at the Sinclair station on the edge of town, grease under his fingernails, sleeves rolled up. He marries a girl named Mary, who liked him before the war, and loves him after, though she says his eyes are different now, quieter somehow. They buy a little house with flaking white paint and a maple tree in the yard. They have a son, Tommy, who likes toy soldiers and drawing tanks in the margins of his schoolwork. Sometimes the town has parades. On Memorial Day and Veterans Day, the VFW boys pull out their uniforms, let out seams or tuck in waists as needed, and march down Main Street under faded flags. Jack's own uniform hangs in the back of the closet, wrapped in a dry cleaner's plastic cover he's never bothered to remove. He goes to the VFW hall sometimes when Kowalski passes through town and insists on a beer that doesn't taste like European ditch water. They sit under yellowed photos and tarnished plaques, swapping stories with other men who've learned to laugh about near death like it was a joke that almost landed. They talk about the time Jenkins slipped in a foxhole and came up without his pants. About Ruiz trying to flirt in broken French and saying something very different than he intended. About a colonel who got lost and followed his own unit in circles for 3 hours. The funny stories. The ones that play well with beer. The other stories? The ones with screams and smoke and friends who didn't come home sit heavier in the air, unspoken like ghosts at the table. One night, after a few too many beers, an old infantryman with a Silver Star ribbon slaps Jack on the shoulder. "You ever save anybody's life over there, Miller?" he asks, half curious, half challenging. Like in the movies. Drag a guy out of the line of fire. A dozen images crowd Jack's mind at once, Jenkins pale-faced on the litter. Doc Heller hands red to the wrists. Ruiz laughing with blood on his boots. And a German in a blanket, eyes washed out blue, whispering "Warum" under a Red Cross flag. Jack takes a breath. "Just did my job," he says, same as everyone else. They nod, satisfied. The jukebox crackles to life in the corner, some slow tune about trains and coming home. The conversation moves on. Jack sips his beer. Later at home, he moves his uniform aside to reach for a box on the closet shelf. His fingers brush metal his dog tags, still on their chain, cold against his skin. He thinks briefly of another pair of tags, different language, different alphabet, hanging on a nail in some field hospital maybe. Or buried with a man whose name Jack never knew. Mary finds him standing there, closet door open. "You okay?" she asks softly, slipping her arm around his waist. "Bad day?" He closes the door gently. "Just thinking," he says. She waits, giving him space to continue if he wants. He doesn't. Years slide by. His hair goes from dark to salt and pepper to mostly white. Tommy grows up, plays ball, reads about the war in school books that turn it into maps and arrows and casualty figures. Sometimes he corners his father at the kitchen table, textbooks open. "Dad, were you at the Battle of the Bulge?" Tommy asks, once eyes bright. "This book says it was the coldest winter in years." Jack can smell the cordite and the frozen blood as if it were yesterday. "Yeah," he says, "it was cold. What was it like?" Jack thinks of snow churned red, of a nameless crossroads near Bastogne, of a wounded German's hand reaching for the sky. He stirs his coffee. "Like being young, where people are trying very hard to make sure you don't get old," he says finally. "Finish your homework, kiddo." Tommy grins, rolls his eyes, and changes the subject. There are 100 moments like that. Openings. Doors he could walk through. He never does. The story he almost didn't tell. Autumn 1974, Ohio. The house smells like coffee and old paper. The TV in the living room hums softly, black and white images bleeding into the dim light. On the screen, a war documentary plays grainy footage of men in helmets moving through snow. Newsreel announcer narrating in that clipped mid-Atlantic voice. During the bitter winter of 1944-1945, American forces held firm around the town of Bastogne. Jack sits in his worn armchair, feet in wool socks, slippered. His hands rest on the arm's knuckles, pale. The years have thickened him a little around the middle, silvered his temples, etched lines at the corners of his eyes. The images on the screen are too familiar. Snow, trees, men bent against the wind. The camera angle changes, showing a German prisoner column men in field gray coats, hands raised, faces gaunt. One of them stumbles. Another reaches out to steady him. You can see the way Jack's shoulders tighten just slightly. In the kitchen, the phone rings. Mary wipes her hands on a dish towel and answers. Jack hears her voice. Yes, he's here? Sure, I'll ask him. And then she appears in the doorway, cradling the receiver against her shoulder. It's Pastor Green, she says gently. He's asking if you'll talk to the youth group next week. They're doing something on faith in wartime. He thought maybe you could share a story or two. On the TV, a medic bends over a wounded man in the snow, tying a bandage. Jack's throat tightens. He knows the kind of story they want. Clean lines, clear heroes. Maybe something about a foxhole prayer or a Bible in a breast pocket stopping a bullet. He swallows. Tell him I'm not much of a storyteller, he says. Kids'd be bored. Mary watches him for a moment, eyes soft. She knows when he's lying. She always has. Okay, she says quietly into the phone. He says maybe another time. She hangs up, lingers in the doorway. On the screen, the documentary shows the Red Cross flag flapping in a winter wind. Jack, Mary asks, do you ever wish you talked about it more? He doesn't answer right away. He's back in that tent just for a second. Smell of antiseptic and blood. A man whispering "Warum" with washed-out blue eyes. I talk about it enough at the VFW, he says, forcing a small smile. Besides, most of what happened over there doesn't make much sense to people who weren't there. Mary crosses the room, sits on the arm of his chair. Her hand finds his shoulder. It doesn't have to make sense, she says. Sometimes people just need to hear that you came back and that there was some kind of goodness left in the middle of all that. He lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. There wasn't much of that, he murmurs. Maybe more than you think, she replies. Her words sit between them like a stone on a table. For a long time, the only sound is the murmur of the TV and the faint tick of the mantel clock. Then quietly, Jack says there was one thing. Mary turns her head, watching his profile. He keeps his gaze on the television, but his eyes aren't really seeing it anymore. Snow, he says softly. Cold like you wouldn't believe. We were outside Bastogne. Took a farmhouse. There was this German out in the field, wounded. Should have died out there. Mary doesn't move. She barely breathes. Jack's hands flex on the chair arms. I went out and got him. Pulled him back. Took him to a field hospital, that's all. Mary is very still. Did he make it, she asks. Jack shakes his head once. I don't know. He doesn't tell her about the blanket, about the lie at triage, about the German's fingers clawing at his sleeve or the word moody hanging in the frozen air. He just knows that at some point he stopped hearing the German cry out in his dreams and started seeing him lying quietly under a tent roof instead. Mary's hand tightens on his shoulder. Why haven't you ever told me that? He shrugs, eyes still on the screen. Didn't seem like it fit with the rest. I wasn't supposed to be out there. Could have gotten myself killed. Probably broke half a dozen regulations. That's not what I mean, she says. Why keep that to yourself? He is quiet for a long moment. Because if I say it out loud, he answers, at last somebody will try to turn it into a story about me being brave. And it wasn't like that. It just felt like if I didn't, I'd come home a different person than the one you were waiting for. The words surprise even him. Mary leans down, presses her forehead to his temple. You came home, she whispers. That's what matters. He nods, but his eyes are distant. On the TV, the documentary cuts to footage of soldiers laughing and waving war reduced to a montage. Mary stays there a moment longer, then stands and goes back to the kitchen. Pots clink. Water runs. Life moves. Jack sits in the flickering light, that single story hanging in the air like breath on a winter morning. He doesn't tell it again. Not to the pastor. Not to the VFW table. Not to Tommy, who grows up, marries, and has kids of his own. Spring 1998. The hospital room smells of bleach and lemon cleaning solution. Machines beep softly in the background lines, tracing heartbeats and oxygen levels in steady neon green. Jack lies propped against white pillows, hair now almost entirely white face, thinner skin mapped with fine lines. An oxygen tube snakes under his nose. The world has shrunk to this bed, this window with its view of a parking lot. This chair where Mary dozes with a blanket over her knees. At the foot of the bed, his grandson Ben flips nervously through a school notebook. Grandpa Ben says, voice low, I have this assignment. We're supposed to interview someone who lived through a big historical event. Mom said I should ask you about the war. Mary wakes at that blinking sleep away. She watches Jack's face. Jack glances at the notebook, at the eager young face so much like Tommy's at that age. Somewhere in a drawer at home, Ben has a jar full of plastic green army men. He almost says no. The words are right there. It was a long time ago. I'm tired. Maybe later, kiddo. But later is becoming a smaller and smaller circle. Sure, he says instead, voice raspy. Ask away. Ben's questions are the ones Jack expects. Were you scared? Was it really that cold? Did you shoot anyone? Did you get a medal? Jack answers carefully. Yes, colder, yes. A few, nothing special. Ben scribbles notes, tongue sticking out in concentration. When he finishes, he hesitates, then looks up. Grandma said Ben begins slowly, that once you helped somebody who wasn't on your side. In the war. Mary's eyes flick to Jack's. He knows exactly what she told and what she didn't. One evening decades ago, over dishes and cooling coffee, she had said, if you ever want your kids to know, I'll tell them. If you don't, I won't. He never gave a clear answer. Looks like at some point she bent that promise just a little. Jack breathes in, rasps out. I dragged a wounded man out of the snow once, he says. That's all. Ben leans forward. Was he German? Jack nods. But? Why Ben asks, frowning in that way kids do when the picture doesn't match the one in their textbook. He was the enemy, right? Jack's gaze drifts to the window. Outside, a tree is budding small green leaves pushing out into the spring light. You know how your mom tells you not to be a bully, he says. How she says it's not enough to just not hurt people? You have to try to help if you can. Ben nods slowly. Well, Jack says out there everybody's trying to hurt everybody. That's the job. But for a minute in that field, nobody was shooting. And he was just a man on the ground who didn't want to die alone. He pauses to catch his breath. I guess I didn't want to be the kind of man who walked past that he finishes. Ben is quiet for a moment, pen hovering. Did he say thank you? He asks. Jack smiles faintly. The memory surfaces the German's fingers on his sleeve, the whispered warum. Not in words I understood, he says, and I never saw him again. Ben writes something down. His tongue pokes out again in concentration. Will you tell this story at school? Jack asks, curious. I think so, Ben says. It's different. They always talk about who won and who lost. They don't really talk about stuff like that. Jack nods, eyes growing heavy. Just remember, he murmurs, I wasn't better than anyone else. I just had one moment where I made a choice I could live with. His eyelids droop. Mary squeezes his hand. Ben closes the notebook, sits very still, watching his grandfather breathe. Jack Miller dies 2 weeks later quietly in that same room. Mary is there. Tommy is there. Ben is there, clutching the notebook. At the funeral, they talk about him as a husband, a father, a reliable man at the gas station, a generous neighbor. The war comes up in a line or two. He served his country honorably in Europe. There's a flag folded just so a bugle playing taps rifles cracking once in the cold air. No one mentions the German in the snow. Years after that, when Ben is grown and the world has moved on to other wars and other headlines, he will sit at a kitchen table with his own son and tell him about a great-grandfather who once carried an enemy out of a killing field. He will not have all the details. He will not know the date, January 14th, 1945, or the exact place, a nameless crossroads outside Bastogne. He will not know about the blanket or the lie at triage, or the word mutti hanging in the frozen air. But he will know this, that in a world built to turn men into enemies, one scared cold American GI made a different choice, and that he almost never spoke about it again.